You don't belong here anymore. You're just a widow, Margaret spat, as she motioned for security to drag Talia out of the mansion. Victor smirked from the corner, tapping a forged document with Ethan's name on it. The family business needs real leaders, not grieving wives. But Talia didn't move. She lifted her chin, her voice steady as stone. I'm not just a widow, she said. I'm the storm you never saw coming. What none of them realized that night was this. The woman they thought they'd broken was about to uncover lies, fraud, and a secret so explosive it could burn them all. This is the story of Talia, a woman who went from broken widow to unstoppable warrior, and what she did will leave you speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more stories like this. The summer evening was soft, the kind of evening that seemed to hold the promise of peace. The garden behind the Spencer family mansion stretched out like a painting, roses leaning heavy with bloom, the fountain murmuring its steady rhythm, the golden light of sunset falling across the old stone walls. Talia Spencer leaned against the balcony rail, her glass of wine untouched in her hand. She watched her husband, Ethan, pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. Even in the fading light, his energy filled the air. He always spoke with such certainty, as though the world moved when he demanded it. You talk to him like you're not asking for a favor but giving one, Talia teased when he finally put the phone away. Ethan grinned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. That's the only way people listen, Talia. Make them believe you don't need them. That's the secret. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Maybe with business partners. Not with me. With you. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers softly. You're the only one I could never live without. She laughed, a sound that eased the tightness she didn't realize had been in her chest all day. Sweet talker. For a while, they just stood together, watching the sky change colors. Talia thought of how lucky she was, the house, the comfort, the man she loved. Even with his long work hours and secretive deals, Ethan was her anchor. Then his phone buzzed again. He sighed, pulling away. I need to head down to the marina. Victor wants to run through some last numbers. Something about the new expansion. Tonight, she asked, disappointment settling in. It won't take long. I'll be back before midnight. He kissed her forehead. Don't wait up if you're tired. Talia forced a smile. Be careful. Always. He winked and left, his footsteps echoing down the grand staircase. She listened until the sound of the front door shutting faded. Hours later, the ring of the house phone sliced through the quiet. Talia, half asleep on the sofa, fumbled for it. Mrs. Spencer. The voice was official, clipped, and it froze her blood before he even explained. This is Officer Daniels from the Harbor Division. There's been an incident. Her throat tightened. Incident. There was an explosion on your husband's boat. We need you to come down. The glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the tiled floor. The harbor reeked of smoke and salt. Red and blue lights painted the night, reflecting on the dark water. Talia ran barefoot across the dock, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold the jacket she had thrown over her shoulders. A uniformed officer stopped her. Mrs. Spencer, you can't. Where is he? She cried. Where's Ethan? Detective Harris stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes steady in a way that was both reassuring and unbearable. Mrs. Spencer, I'm Detective Harris. Please, you need to prepare yourself. We recovered remains from the boat. We believe they're your husband's. The world tilted. She felt her knees give way, and Harris caught her before she hit the dock. No, that's not possible. He just left. He said he'd be back. He said. Her voice broke into sobs. Harris didn't push, didn't argue. He just let her cry against his shoulder while the fire crews worked in the background, their hoses hissing against what was left of the burning boat. At the hospital morgue later that night, the air was so cold it bit through her thin blouse. Talia's breath fogged as she followed a nurse down the sterile corridor. Are you sure you want to do this? The nurse asked gently. Talia nodded, though her whole body screamed against it. When they drew back the white sheet, the world collapsed into silence. What was left of Ethan was barely recognizable. But the watch on his wrist, the one she'd given him on their 5th anniversary, glinted faintly in the harsh light. Her scream filled the room, raw and broken. She clutched at her chest, as though her heart had been ripped out with him. And that was the moment Margaret Spencer walked in. Tall, regal, her silver hair swept back, Margaret looked like a queen surveying a battlefield. Her eyes, sharp and cold, flicked over Talia's crumpled form on the floor. "You should compose yourself," Margaret said flatly. "This display is hardly dignified." Talia turned, stunned. "Dignified? Your son is. He's gone. His." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "My son is dead because he surrounded himself with weakness. And now look at you. Wailing like a child. Pathetic." The words cut deeper than any blade. Talia stared at her, unable to form words. Margaret stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the cold air. "You were never strong enough for him, Talia. And now that he's gone, you are nothing. Do you understand? Nothing." Talia's tears blurred her vision, but even through the haze she could see the cruelty in Margaret's eyes. That night, grief had no room to breathe. It was already being choked by something darker, a war she didn't yet understand. The mansion felt hollow without Ethan. Every corner whispered his absence, his jacket still hanging by the door, his coffee cup left in the kitchen sink, the faint smell of his cologne on the pillow. Talia wandered from room to room in her robe, unable to sit still. The silence pressed on her chest like a weight. 3 days after the funeral, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Margaret standing there, flanked by 2 lawyers in sharp suits. Talia's stomach tightened. "Margaret, what is this?" Margaret didn't bother with small talk. She swept into the foyer as though she owned it, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "These are Mr. Callahan and Ms. Reed," she said coldly. "They represent the Spencer family's interests." "Interests?" Talia repeated, confused. The male lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Spencer." "Miss," Margaret corrected sharply. "She's no longer Mrs. Spencer. My son is gone." The word struck like a slap. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably but continued. "Miss Talia, this property legally belongs to the Spencer estate. Given the circumstances, Mrs. Spencer Sr. has decided you are no longer entitled to reside here. We're here to serve notice of eviction." Talia stared at the papers he handed her. The letters swam through her tears. "Eviction? This is my home. Ethan wanted me here." Margaret's voice was like ice. "Ethan wanted many things. Unfortunately, his poor choices have left us with debts, scandals, and shame. We cannot afford to let you drag this family down any further." Talia's hands shook as she clutched the papers. "I just buried my husband. And you come here, now? With lawyers?" Margaret's lips curved in the faintest sneer. "I warned Ethan about you. Told him you were a burden, not a partner. And look what's happened. You'll leave quietly, or I'll make sure you're dragged out." The humiliation burned hotter than her grief. Talia's voice cracked. "How can you be so cruel? I loved him." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Love doesn't keep a legacy intact. You were a mistake, and now you're finished." For a long moment, the only sound was the echo of Margaret's heels as she turned and walked out, her lawyers following. When the door shut, Talia sank against it, her whole body trembling. She pressed the eviction notice to her chest, her tears staining the ink. That evening, Detective Harris called. His voice was steady, but she caught the weight behind his words. "Mrs. Spencer, sorry, Talia. I've been reviewing the case. Something about the explosion doesn't add up." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "The fire was too fast, too clean. Almost like it was meant to erase evidence. I think we're looking at sabotage." The word hit her like a jolt. Sabotage. Not accident. Are you saying someone killed Ethan? She whispered. I'm saying we can't rule it out. And if that's true, you may not just be grieving. You may be in danger. Talia pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window, staring at the garden below. Why would anyone want to kill him? That's what I intend to find out, Harris said. But I need your help. You were closest to him. Did Ethan seem worried lately? Nervous? She thought of his distracted phone calls, the late nights at the marina, the way he'd brush off her questions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her voice was faint. Yes. He was hiding something. But I don't know what. Then we'll find out together, Harris said. When the call ended, Talia stood in the silent house, staring at the eviction notice on the table. Margaret wanted her gone. Someone may have wanted Ethan dead. And all she had left were questions that cut like knives. Grief still strangled her. But somewhere deep beneath it, something else began to stir, a flicker of anger. She didn't know it yet, but that flicker was the first spark of the fire that would change everything. The mansion had grown into a museum of silence. Days blurred into nights, and still, Talia felt Ethan's absence pressing in on her like heavy walls. His chair at the dining table stayed empty, the study untouched, as though he might walk through the door at any moment and laugh at her for worrying. But he didn't. The eviction notice from Margaret sat like poison on the kitchen counter. Talia couldn't bring herself to touch it again, but she couldn't throw it away either. It was a reminder of how quickly everything had been ripped from her. That morning, she walked aimlessly into Ethan's study. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar. His desk was neat, too neat for him. Ethan usually left papers in untidy stacks. Something about the tidiness made her skin crawl. She pulled open drawers. Bills, contracts, receipts. Nothing unusual. Until her hand brushed against the back panel of the lowest drawer. It felt loose. She pressed harder, and with a soft click, the panel shifted. Behind it was a slim black box. Her breath caught as she lifted it out. The metal was cold in her hands, the lock simple enough that she managed to force it open with a hairpin. Inside were stacks of documents, contracts, bank statements, loan agreements. At first glance, they looked ordinary. But when she read closer, the world tilted again. Her name appeared again and again, on loan applications, on property transfers, but the signatures were wrong. Sloppy imitations. Talia whispered to herself, horrified. That's not me. I never signed this. She flipped page after page, her pulse racing. Some papers tied Ethan to offshore accounts. Others showed large sums of money being funneled through shell companies with Victor's name scribbled in the margins. Her hands shook so badly the papers nearly slipped from her grasp. She remembered the night Ethan had said, "I'll always protect you." Protect her from what? From who? But if he was trying to shield her, why use her name for debts she never agreed to? Hot tears welled. Her husband wasn't just hiding things. He had dragged her into something dangerous. And maybe that's why he was dead. The sound of the study door creaking startled her. A woman's voice broke the silence. You're not imagining things. Talia turned sharply. Standing in the doorway was Grace Miller, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied back, sharp glasses, and a calm authority that filled the room. She held out a card. I'm Grace. Detective Harris asked me to stop by. I used to be a forensic accountant. Talia blinked at her through tears. Forensic accountant. I followed the money for 30 years. People lie, numbers don't. Grace stepped forward and glanced at the papers spread across the desk. Her eyes narrowed. Forged signatures. Amateur work. Whoever did this was sloppy. They thought you'd never look. Talia swallowed hard. Why would Ethan? Why would my husband put my name on these things? Grace's voice softened. Maybe he didn't. Maybe someone else did, to trap him or to trap you. The words chilled Talia to her core. Victor, she whispered. Grace nodded slightly. We'll need to confirm. But yes, his fingerprints are all over this. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. Fraud. Talia's voice broke. So Ethan, was he guilty? Or was he a victim? Grace sighed, adjusting her glasses. That's what we'll find out. But one thing's certain, you can't let Margaret or Victor push you around. If you crumble, they win. Talia hugged her arms around herself. I don't know how to fight them. I can barely breathe some days. Grace studied her for a long moment. Then she said quietly, then it's time to learn. 2 days later, Margaret returned. She didn't knock, she simply let herself in, her heels clicking across the marble as if she already owned the place. Talia was in the hallway when Margaret appeared, tall and severe, her mouth twisted in disdain. You're still here, Margaret said coldly. I expected you gone by now. Talia's stomach tightened, but she stood straighter than before. This is my home. Ethan wanted me here. Margaret's laugh was sharp and cruel. Ethan is gone. What he wanted means nothing. You're nothing but a widow clinging to scraps. Talia's throat burned. For a moment, the old helplessness threatened to choke her. But then she remembered Grace's voice. If you crumble, they win. Her fingers curled into fists. She forced her voice to stay steady. You will not speak to me that way again. Margaret blinked, surprised. What did you say? You heard me. Talia took a step closer, her heart pounding. You may think I'm weak. Maybe I was. But I won't let you bully me anymore. You'll have to drag me out yourself. For the first time, Margaret faltered. The faintest flicker of doubt crossed her face. But then she smirked. We'll see how long that courage lasts when the bank comes calling, she sneered. And with a swirl of her expensive coat, she left. Talia sagged against the wall, her whole body shaking. But beneath the fear was something new, a spark of power. That afternoon, Grace arrived again. She studied Talia's pale face and trembling hands. Margaret was here, wasn't she? Grace asked. Talia nodded. I stood up to her. But I don't know how long I can keep this up. Grace's gaze softened. You did good. But strength isn't just about words. It's about being able to stand when the ground shakes under you. Which is why I asked someone to meet you. Before Talia could ask, the sound of heavy footsteps came from the foyer. A broad-shouldered man entered, early 40s, rugged, with scarred knuckles and a kind of grounded presence. This is Caleb, Grace said. Boxing coach. Old friend of mine. He's agreed to help you. Talia blinked. Help me. I'm not trying to fight anyone. Caleb's voice was deep, calm. You're already in a fight, whether you like it or not. With grief. With Margaret. With whoever tried to kill your husband. If you don't learn to fight back, you'll be swallowed whole. Talia shook her head. I've never been strong like that. I don't know if I can. Caleb studied her for a moment, then said quietly, You think strength means never falling down. That's not it. Strength is standing up again, even when your legs shake. Something about the simplicity of his words pierced through the fog in her mind. The next morning, she found herself standing in an old gym that smelled of sweat and leather. Caleb handed her gloves. Hit the bag, he said. She lifted her hands awkwardly, punching weakly. The bag barely moved. Caleb shook his head. That's not a punch. That's a whisper. Again. She hit harder. Again. 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 Until her arms ached, her chest heaved, and tears stung her eyes. Finally, she cried out, slamming the bag with everything she had. Why did you leave me? She screamed, imagining Ethan's face, Margaret's sneer, Victor's smug grin. Blow after blow. Her knees buckled, but Caleb caught her before she hit the floor. There, he said quietly. That's the fire. Don't let it die. For the first time since Ethan's death, Talia felt something other than grief. It wasn't peace. It wasn't joy. It was raw, burning anger, but it was hers, and it made her feel alive. That night, she sat in Ethan's study again with Grace, reviewing the forged documents. Every piece of this leads back to Victor, Grace said, pointing with her pen. He was bleeding the company dry. And when Ethan started resisting, things turned ugly. Talia stared at the papers. Her voice was steady this time. Then Victor is going to pay. I don't care how powerful he thinks he is. He's not going to bury me. He's not going to bury Ethan's truth. Grace nodded approvingly. That's the fire. Hold on to it. Talia looked out the study window, her reflection faint against the dark glass. She barely recognized the woman staring back, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but glowing with something harder. She whispered to herself, I'm not going to break. And for the first time since the explosion, she believed it. The gym sessions with Caleb were starting to change Talia. The grief still lived inside her, a heavy stone lodged in her chest, but now it was layered with something new, strength. Every punch against the bag, every bead of sweat, every gasp for air was a reminder that she was not helpless anymore. But grief doesn't pause for transformation. It follows like a shadow. And so did Victor. The first time she saw him after Ethan's death was at a business conference downtown. She hadn't planned on going, but Grace insisted. You need to see him in his world, Grace said. Watch how he operates. A predator always shows his teeth when he thinks the crowd is on his side. The hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers. Men and women in polished suits sipped wine, shook hands, exchanged the kind of smiles that never touched their eyes. Victor Harrington stood in the center of it all, tall, smooth, his suit cut sharp enough to wound. His dark hair was slicked back, his smile charming, but his eyes carried that predator's glint Grace had warned her about. Talia froze when she saw him. Her chest tightened, anger and fear twisting together. Victor spotted her instantly. His smile widened, and he cut through the crowd as though he owned it. Talia, he said warmly, taking her hand before she could pull away. I was so sorry to hear about Ethan. Such a tragedy. Her stomach churned. His words sounded smooth, but his grip was too firm, his eyes too calculating. You don't look sorry, she replied quietly. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Careful. People are watching. You don't want them thinking you're unhinged in your grief. Talia's anger flared. You used his name, his company, his life. I found the papers, Victor. I know what you did. Victor's smile never wavered. You think you know, but you don't. Ethan was reckless. He dragged both of us into a mess far bigger than you can imagine. I was trying to clean it up. She narrowed her eyes. By forging my name? By stealing everything? He shrugged, sipping his champagne. Collateral damage. Business is war, Talia. If you step onto the battlefield, you can't cry about the blood. Her hand shook. She wanted to slap the glass out of his smug grip, but Grace's voice in her memory steadied her. If you crumble, they win. So instead, she forced her own smile. You're right, Victor. Business is war. And I'm done being collateral. For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed his polished face. We'll see, he muttered, before turning back to charm another group of investors. Later, Grace found her standing by the balcony doors, her body still trembling. You did well, Grace said. He wanted to rattle you, but you held your ground. Talia's voice was low. He's dangerous. I can feel it. Grace nodded. And he's sloppy. He's left a trail in those documents. All we have to do is follow it. But Talia's thoughts kept circling back to his words. Ethan was reckless. He dragged us into something bigger. She looked out at the glittering skyline, a pit forming in her stomach. Was Ethan a victim, or had he played a bigger role than she dared admit? The scandal broke on a rainy Tuesday morning. Talia woke to the sound of her phone buzzing endlessly. Dozens of missed calls, texts from numbers she didn't know. Headlines flashing across her screen. Business tycoon Victor Harrington linked to fraud. Millions missing. Forged documents tie to Spencer estate. Is Victor Harrington behind Ethan Spencer's death? Her hands shook as she scrolled, her heart pounding. Grace had been working with Lena, the sharp young journalist, for weeks. They had promised to wait until the evidence was airtight. And now, here it was, on every news channel. The doorbell rang, and Talia nearly jumped out of her skin. When she opened it, Lena herself stood there, soaked from the rain, her notebook clutched to her chest. "You're the story now," Lena said breathlessly. "The widow who's standing against the empire. People want to hear your voice." Talia blinked at her. "My voice? I'm not." "Yes, you are," Lena interrupted. "Look, this isn't just about Ethan anymore. Victor's crimes are bigger than anyone guessed. Offshore accounts, bribed officials, threats. You can either stay silent, or you can speak, and when you speak, people will listen." Talia hesitated. For weeks, she'd been buried under grief, under Margaret's cruelty, under Victor's shadow. The idea of speaking out felt terrifying. But another part of her remembered what Caleb had said, "You're already in a fight, whether you like it or not." She took a deep breath. "Fine. I'll talk." The interview aired that evening. Talia sat in front of the camera, her hands clasped tightly, her voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each word. "My husband, Ethan Spencer, was not perfect. But he didn't deserve what happened to him. Someone tried to erase him, and erase me. Victor Harrington forged my name, stole from us, and now tries to paint me as unstable. But I will not be silenced. Not anymore." The clip spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with support, #Justice for Ethan, #Stand with Talia. For the first time, she felt the world wasn't just watching, it was with her. But Margaret was not impressed. That night, the older woman stormed into the mansion unannounced, her fury sharp as a blade. "How dare you!" Margaret hissed, slamming the television remote onto the coffee table. The news replayed Talia's interview in the background. "Parading yourself on television like some common whore, dragging our name through the mud." Talia rose slowly from the sofa, her heartbeat steady. "Our name?" "Margaret, Ethan's name is already covered in lies. Lies Victor wrote, and you stood by and ignored." Margaret's eyes blazed. "I have spent my entire life protecting this family's reputation. And you, a little nobody, think you can stand there and defy me?" Talia stepped closer, her voice low but unshaking. "I am not a nobody. I was your son's wife. And whether you like it or not, I'm the one who will decide how his story is remembered." Margaret sneered. "You'll regret crossing me." Talia lifted her chin. "No. You'll regret underestimating me." The silence between them burned. For once, Margaret had no retort. She spun on her heel and stormed out, her heels cracking against the marble like gunshots. Later that night, Talia sat with Grace and Caleb in the study. The rain pattered softly against the windows, but inside the air was charged. "You've started a war," Grace said, adjusting her glasses. "Victor won't take this quietly. He'll fight back. Hard." Caleb leaned forward. "Good. Let him fight. Every punch he throws. We'll be ready. Talia's not that broken widow anymore. She's tougher than she knows." Talia looked at them both, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in weeks, belonging. For the first time since Ethan's death, she wasn't alone. But deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Victor wasn't just a greedy partner. Margaret wasn't just a cruel in-law. Something darker tied them all together, something Ethan had tried to shield her from. She clenched her fists, remembering the way Victor had smirked, the way Margaret had sneered. "They think I'll crumble," she said softly, her voice trembling not with fear but with fury. "They think I'll disappear. But I'm not going anywhere." Her reflection stared back at her from the window, the widow, the fighter, the woman slowly rising from ashes. And for the first time, she believed her own words. The courtroom was packed. Reporters crowded the benches, their pens scratching feverishly, cameras flashing every time the door opened. The air buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just a fraud case anymore. It was the scandal of the year. Talia sat at the plaintiff's table beside Grace and Detective Harris. Her palms were clammy, but she forced herself to sit straight, chin lifted. She could feel Margaret's glare drilling into her from the back row, but she refused to turn around. Across the aisle, Victor sat with his expensive legal team, radiating false confidence. His suit was pristine, his hair slick, his smile cool. But Talia saw it now, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his jaw clenched when the press cameras clicked. The cracks were there, even if no one else noticed. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the trial began. Grace was the first to take the stand. She adjusted her glasses, laid out a stack of files, and spoke in her calm, razor-sharp tone. "These signatures," she explained, pointing to enlarged exhibits projected on the screen, "are all dated within the last 18 months. They appear to belong to Mrs. Talia Spencer. But after a forensic comparison with her verified signatures, it is clear they are forgeries." The jury leaned forward, listening intently. Grace continued, "Furthermore, these loans were funneled through accounts traced directly back to Victor Harrington's holding companies. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Belize. The paper trail is clear. Money left Ethan Spencer's business, passed through these accounts, and disappeared." Victor's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him off. The evidence was too solid. Grace's voice never wavered. This was not carelessness. It was deliberate fraud, designed to bankrupt Ethan Spencer's company while pinning the blame on his wife. Talia's chest tightened as she listened. Every word felt like both a dagger and a balm, painful because it confirmed Ethan had been dragged into lies, but relieving because she wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined the betrayal. It was real. When Grace stepped down, Talia reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Grace gave her a small nod. "This is only the beginning." The prosecution called witness after witness. Former employees testified about strange instructions from Victor. Accountants admitted they were pressured into signing off on irregular numbers. The mountain of evidence grew. Finally, Victor himself was called to the stand. He walked up with his usual swagger, straightening his tie as though this were just another business meeting he intended to dominate. The lawyer began with softballs. "Mr. Harrington, did you ever authorize fraudulent transfers?" Victor smiled smoothly. "Of course not. Any such suggestion is absurd." "Did you ever forge Talia Spencer's signature?" "Absolutely not. Why would I? I had no reason to involve her." But the questions grew sharper, the evidence heavier. Grace's files were brought out again. Each time Victor denied, another piece of proof was presented, his initials scribbled on memos, his emails authorizing transfers. Sweat began to bead at his temples. His voice, once silky, grew defensive. "I told you, Ethan was reckless. He was drowning in debt. I tried to help him. If anyone's to blame, it's him." The room buzzed with whispers. The lawyer pressed harder. "Are you saying Ethan Spencer orchestrated this fraud himself?" Victor snapped, his composure cracking. "Yes. He was a coward, too weak to face his failures. He dragged me into his mess." Talia's breath caught. Her nails dug into her palms. The lawyer stepped closer. "So you admit you were involved?" Victor's face twisted. "I admit nothing. But don't paint him as some saint. Ethan isn't even dead." The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. The entire courtroom gasped. Reporters scrambled, scribbling furiously. Talia felt the blood drain from her face. Her voice trembled. "What did you say?" Victor's eyes darted wildly. His mask had shattered. "He's not dead. They wanted him gone, so I I just made it happen. He's alive. They're keeping him somewhere safe, so he can't ruin everything." The judge pounded the gavel, demanding order, but the room was chaos. Harris leapt to his feet, his jaw tight. "Where?" he barked. "Where is he, Victor?" Victor stammered, suddenly pale. I don't know exactly. A warehouse, near the docks. They didn't tell me everything. I swear." The gavel slammed again, the judge shouting for silence, but Talia's world had already tilted off its axis. Alive. Ethan might be alive. Her heart raced, her hands trembling so hard she could barely breathe. For weeks she had buried him in her heart, mourned him, screamed for him in the dark. And now, alive. That night blurred into a whirlwind. Harris gathered his team, securing warrants and tactical gear. Talia sat in the precinct, her heart pounding with every second that passed. She should have been relieved, hopeful. But instead, her chest was a storm. If Ethan was alive, why hadn't he come back? Why had he let her believe he was dead? Grace sat beside her, calm as ever, but her hand rested gently over Talia's trembling one. "Whatever happens tonight, you're strong enough to face it." Caleb stood on her other side, arms crossed. "If he's alive, you get answers. If not, you've already proven you can stand without him." Talia swallowed hard, nodding. The raid began just before dawn. The sky was a bruised purple, the air damp with salt from the bay. Harris's team moved silently across the deserted docks, their flashlights cutting through the fog. Talia stayed back with Grace and Caleb, her stomach twisting. The warehouse loomed in the distance, dark and silent, its windows boarded up, its walls rusted from years of neglect. "On my mark," Harris whispered into his radio. The officers spread out, weapons raised. With a crash, they rammed the door. Shouts filled the air. The sound of boots thundered inside. Talia's breath caught as she clutched Caleb's arm. The minutes stretched into forever. She heard muffled voices, a scuffle, then silence. Finally, Harris emerged from the shadows. His expression was grim, but his eyes softened when he saw her. "Talia," he said quietly, "we found him." Her knees buckled, and Caleb caught her before she collapsed. "Alive," she whispered. Harris nodded. "Alive." Inside the warehouse, the air reeked of mildew and rust. Chains clinked as officers cut them from a figure slumped against the wall. Ethan. His face was bruised, his hair overgrown, his body gaunt. But it was him. The sight tore through Talia like lightning. She rushed forward, tears streaming. "Ethan!" His head lifted weakly. His eyes, swollen and bloodshot, widened when they met hers. "Talia!" His voice cracked, hoarse from weeks of silence. She dropped to her knees beside him, clutching his face in her hands. "Oh God! I thought you were dead. I thought." Her voice broke into sobs. He leaned into her touch, tears mingling with hers. "I wanted to protect you," he whispered. "They told me if I disappeared, you'd be safe. I couldn't let them touch you." Talia's chest twisted with 1,000 emotions, relief, rage, heartbreak. She kissed his forehead, her hands trembling, but her words came out like steel. "You don't get to decide that. You don't get to disappear and leave me to be destroyed." Ethan's eyes searched hers desperately. "I thought I was saving you." But something inside Talia had shifted. She wasn't the broken, helpless wife who clung to him anymore. She was the woman who had stood up to Margaret, who had faced Victor, who had fought her way back from ashes. She pulled back, her voice steady despite her tears. "You didn't save me. I saved myself." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. Officers lifted him carefully, leading him toward the waiting ambulance. Talia followed, her heart torn between love and fury, relief and betrayal. As the dawn broke over the docks, painting the sky with streaks of gold, she realized something profound. Ethan's return didn't erase her journey. His survival didn't mean she would go back to who she had been. She wasn't just Ethan's wife anymore. She was Talia, and she had learned to stand without him. That morning, as the ambulance carried Ethan away and reporters swarmed the scene, Caleb placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. Her voice was quiet but firm. "No. But I will be." Grace's eyes softened behind her glasses. "Whatever comes next, remember this moment. You found him, but you also found yourself." Talia nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the rising sun. The world had tried to bury her. But she was still here. Still standing. And she was just beginning. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. Machines beeped in steady rhythms, nurses walked briskly through the halls, and every door carried a story of survival or surrender. Talia sat in a plastic chair outside Ethan's room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The past 24 hours had been a blur, the raid, the rescue, the reporters shouting questions as Ethan was carried into the ambulance. Now, the adrenaline had drained from her body, leaving only exhaustion and the gnawing weight of choices she hadn't wanted to face. Through the small window in the door, she could see him. Ethan Spencer. Alive. Breathing. His chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms as machines whispered their support. His face, once so strong and confident, was pale and hollow. His hands trembled when he tried to hold a cup of water. She had dreamed of this moment, night after night, begging God or fate or anyone who would listen to give him back. And now he was here. But instead of pure relief, she felt a strange, painful dissonance. The man she loved had returned, but she was no longer the woman who had lost him. The door creaked open, and Caleb stepped out. He had been inside, speaking quietly with Ethan, helping him sit up. His presence, steady and unshakable, had been her anchor these past weeks. "He wants to see you," Caleb said softly. His eyes searched hers. "But Talia, don't forget who you are now. You don't have to go back to being what you were before." She swallowed hard, nodding. Inside the room, Ethan lifted his head when she entered. His eyes filled with tears instantly. "Talia," his voice was raspy, fragile. She hurried to his side, her fingers brushing his cheek. "You're alive. You're really here." He closed his eyes, leaning into her hand. "I thought I'd never see you again. I wanted to come back, every second. But they threatened you. They said if I surfaced, they'd destroy you. I did it to protect you." Her heart ached. She wanted to throw herself into his arms, to forget everything but his warmth. But then she remembered the eviction notice Margaret had shoved into her hands. The forged documents with her name scrawled across them. Victor smirking in the ballroom. The bruises on her knuckles from Caleb's training. She had walked through fire to stand here now. Talia's voice was quiet but firm. "Ethan, you thought disappearing would save me. But it nearly broke me. Do you understand that? You left me to Margaret's cruelty, to Victor's lies, to believe that you had been burned alive on that boat while I drowned in grief." His eyes brimmed with guilt. "I know. I was wrong. I thought I was sparing you pain, but I caused worse. Please, Talia, forgive me. We can start again. Together." The words once would have lit up her soul. But now, they landed differently. She pulled her hand back, her chest tightening. "I can't just go back, Ethan. I'm not the woman you left. I've learned to stand without you. I've learned to fight. And I can't unlearn that." His lips parted, but no sound came. She stood slowly, her eyes locked on his. "I'll always care for you. But I don't need you to be whole anymore." Tears slipped down his cheeks as he whispered, "So, what does that mean for us?" Her throat tightened. "It means I'm choosing myself first. For the first time." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving Ethan staring after her, the weight of his choices heavy on his fragile frame. The days that followed were a storm of media frenzy. Victor's confession tore through the news like wildfire. Margaret tried desperately to salvage the Spencer name, calling press conferences, spinning lies, painting herself as the grieving mother of a son led astray by dangerous business associates. But her voice trembled in ways it never had before. The iron mask was cracking. Talia, meanwhile, found herself in front of cameras once more. Lena pushed her forward as the face of truth, of survival. But this time, Talia wasn't shaking. Her voice was strong. "I am not just a widow," she told the press. "I am not a victim. I am a survivor of betrayal, of grief, of abandonment. And I know there are women everywhere who have been left behind, by death, by lies, by men who promised forever and vanished. I will not let their pain be invisible. That is why I am founding the Phoenix Foundation for Widows of the Living." Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward. But the only thing that mattered was the fire in her chest, the certainty that her story could mean something more. The mansion, once a cage Margaret had tried to rip from her, became her battlefield. Room by room, she remade it. Lawyers helped her untangle the legal knots, Grace meticulously ensuring the property was secured under her name. Margaret tried every trick, threats, bribes, sobbing pleas, but Talia stood firm. "This house is mine," she told Margaret one final time, her voice cool as steel. "Not because Ethan gave it to me. Not because you allow it. It's mine because I took it back when you tried to steal it. And you will never step foot in it again." Margaret's face twisted in fury, but she had no weapons left. She turned and left without a word, her shadow shrinking against the grand doors. Talia shut them firmly behind her, the echo ringing like a victory bell. The Phoenix Foundation was born in that very mansion. What had once been silent halls of grief became alive with voices, with women carrying their own scars. Lawyers volunteered services. Therapists offered free counseling. Caleb ran strength workshops in the converted gym. Grace gave financial literacy classes, teaching women how to read contracts, how to spot fraud, how to never be deceived again. And at the center of it all was Talia, her voice guiding, her presence steady. "This house tried to bury me," she told the first group of women gathered in the great hall. "But instead, it became the place where I learned to rise. And so will you." The day of the Foundation's official launch dawned bright and clear. The mansion gleamed with light, its once intimidating stone walls draped with banners bearing the emblem of a rising phoenix. The courtyard was filled with chairs, cameras, and the hum of anticipation. Talia stood in front of the mirror in her room, fastening a simple silver pendant around her neck. She chose no extravagant gown, no armor of wealth. Just a navy dress, elegant but plain, her hair loose around her shoulders. She wanted to be seen not as a Spencer, not as a widow, but as herself. Caleb knocked gently and stepped in. His presence was solid, as always. "You ready?" he asked. She met his gaze in the mirror. "I've never been more ready." He smiled faintly. "Good. Because they're not just looking at you. They're looking for hope." She nodded, her heart steady. The courtyard was packed when she stepped out. Reporters lined the edges, flashing cameras. Women filled the chairs, some with tear-streaked faces, others with guarded eyes. Survivors, fighters, dreamers, each carrying stories of abandonment and loss. Talia took her place at the podium. The murmur quieted. All eyes were on her. She gripped the edges of the podium, took a deep breath, and spoke. "I was once called nothing but a widow. A woman without a place. I was told I had no power, no voice, no future. But they were wrong. Loss does not have to bury you. It can build you. Betrayal does not have to silence you. It can sharpen your voice. This mansion was nearly taken from me, but I refused to let it define me as a victim. Now, it will stand as a beacon for every woman who has been left behind, abandoned, betrayed, or stripped of her stability. This is the Phoenix Foundation. And like the phoenix, we will rise." The crowd erupted into applause. Some women wept openly, others stood and clapped with fierce pride. Cameras flashed, recording every word, every tear, every spark of fire in her voice. Later, as the crowd dispersed, A reporter called out the question everyone had been waiting to ask. Talia, now that Ethan Spencer has been found alive, will you reunite with him? The world seemed to hold its breath. Talia paused, her gaze steady, her voice calm. Ethan is alive, and I am grateful for that. But I am not the same woman I was when I lost him. I don't need to be defined as his wife, or as his widow. I am defined by what I've built, by who I've become. So the answer is no, I will not go back. I am moving forward. The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked in a frenzy. But all Talia felt was a lightness she hadn't known in months. The weight of expectation, of grief, of dependency, had lifted. As evening fell, she walked through the halls of the mansion, now alive with voices and laughter. Women sat in small circles, sharing their stories. Grace was in the study, sketching out financial workshops. Caleb was in the gym with a group, teaching them how to throw their first punches. Talia paused on the grand staircase, looking down at it all. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. It was alive, transformed, as she was. She whispered softly to herself, a vow and a truth. When the world tried to write my ending, I chose to author my own beginning. And with that, she stepped forward into her new life, not as a widow, not as a wife, but as a warrior. Talia's story reminds us that when the world tries to write your ending, you can still choose to author your own beginning. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, share it with someone who needs strength today, and join me for more powerful stories of survival, betrayal, and transformation. Because sometimes, the rise from the ashes is just the beginning.